Put your hands on top of your head.
Well, I didn't.
Now!
And I'll bet your mother had a loud bark.
Good morning. This is Morning Coffee with the Chief. I'm your host, Patrick Jordan, here on I'm not KGRA. This is Pop Culture Minefield on YouTube and Pop Culture Minefield on Rumble. You know, our subscriptions are growing on YouTube. If you are a listener and you're not subscribing to the show, please do me a favor, subscribe and help build those numbers. It helps with our algorithm. And also, if you choose to listen to us on Rumble, there you follow us. But on both platforms, we want you to like the show, comment, and share it with a friend. Now, I've been doing this for over a year. This is a really fun show, and I've always this gave me an outlet for my political comments. And I now have another show. That one's on KGRA Radio. That's a Briefing with the Chief every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And tomorrow, I'm actually going to talk to Chief Jake Fitcher from the El Monte Police Department. He had 2 police officers that were killed in 2022. And there is a whole recovery process for folks when that happens at a small agency. I mean, even a big agency like mine, but you get to be a little bit more like family when you're at a department where you work there for 20 or 30 years. And it's a big challenge. There's guilt, there's survivor's guilt, there's blame, there's just this whole psychological thing that the staff goes through and a small city goes through. And Chief Fitcher is going to come on, and we're going to talk about that. We'll talk about the case. We'll talk about who did what, the federal investigation that targeted the gang that killed these 2 police officers, and then we'll talk about the recovery. And I think this is an appropriate subject for us to get into on that show, Briefing with the Chief, every Wednesday on KGRA Radio at KGRADB.com. And particularly because yesterday we had a couple of upstate New York police officers killed, a deputy sheriff and a police officer, clearly set up. I haven't got all the details on it yet, but I'm going to gather those details and talk about it tomorrow. But also, just next month is Police Week. It's May 12th through the 18th, in which we honor all the police officers who have given their lives in the past year, and their names are installed on the Police Memorial in Washington, D.C. Now, they have one in California as well. Many states have their own memorials, and they replicate Police Week in their state. So if you're aware of what's going on in your state, or maybe they don't do something in your state, you can look at what's going on at the federal level and honor the police officers who died in line of duty by making a donation to the Police Memorial in Washington, D.C., or at least tuning in to see what is going on with our police officers, because it is a dangerous place out there these days for police officers. Now, my guest today for our show, the movie we're going to do is Lovely Bones. And before I got to do my I got to do my Los Angeles mission pitch. I'm on my other show. I also do public policy, and the CEO, Troy Vaughn, is coming on my other show, Briefing with the Chief. So if you want to get a little more in-depth knowledge of the LA mission, you can watch. He's coming on in a couple weeks, and we're going to talk about everything that his organization does. But they do a great job. They feed over 400, they provide over 400,000 meals a year. They provide a temporary bed for those who want to get off the streets for a night, and take a shower, get some basic supplies, maybe get a checkup here and there. And they use that as an opportunity to seek those folks that are ready to get off the streets. And then they provide wraparound services for those guys who are ready to make a change, inclusive of cognitive behavioral therapy programs, which is the gold standard if you are going to help everybody integrate back into a regular lifestyle. And but they are a faith-based organization, so government funding is limited. So check out the losangelesmission.org and make a donation and help out a needy person today. I was just looking at some data. We have a lot of the homeless people living on the streets that are dying in large number because of fentanyl and methamphetamine. It is a huge problem. It is a black mark on our society these days that we allow this. And it's mostly, in my opinion, due to some bad public policy. And hopefully, we have some bright spots like the Los Angeles Mission that can at least meet some of the basic needs for the folks in Skid Row and downtown Los Angeles. And if you want to donate to your local area, find out where they got a homeless shelter and make a donation and help them out. You can catch me as I comment on a variety of political issues at my X handle at LSDJordan. And I every now and then I get trolled by some anti-cop guys, so it's always a little entertaining. But I do comment on a wide variety of issues on my X handle. And so check me out on Twitter. Check me out on kjradb.com, Briefing with the Chief. And let's get into our show today. So the show today we're going to talk about is The Lovely Bones. It was released in 2009. It's a supernatural drama film. So it's a little different than what I normally do in terms of cop and police shows. It was directed by Peter Jackson, great director. And it was based upon a book, and it has some great people in it. Well, it has Mark Wahlberg's in it, Rachel Weisz is in it, Susan. Well, I don't know if Susan Sarandon would be a great person. I'll tell you a story about her that I have. Stanley Tucci, who was nominated for an Academy Award, he was fantastic. He plays the serial killer in this movie, and Michael Palario, I think that's Polari. That's how he says his name. Maybe Martine can help me with that last name, but he also starred in. If I remember correctly, started in Sopranos. And then Saoirse Ronan. I don't know why they got all these different names here. They make it hard for a troglodyte like me to pronounce these names. But anyways, to help me with this show, certain Martin is going to jump in and make some comments. He listened to the movie. It had an impact. I watched the movie. Had an impact on him. And also retired Sergeant Danny Coon from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. Now, he's been on before. He's been on both of my shows, actually. Welcome back, Danny.
Hi, thank you, Chief. I appreciate being back again, and it's always a pleasure to be on any of your shows.
Well, what'd you think of the movie?
I watched it last night. It was interesting. It was different. Not really into the supernatural movies, but that was it reminded me. It was kind of like a mixture of modern day Ghost, the movie Ghost.
Yeah. There was she's looking over her family till they. But
once I figured it out, okay, and now I know what the plot is and everything like that, because it was totally different from what I read in the build up to it.
Well, the person who wrote the book, she had been a victim of rape in college, and then she had been influenced by a child murder in Philadelphia, and she decided to write the book based upon her own experience and the murder that occurred, and she wanted to write it from the victim's standpoint. So it's pretty hard to do when the person's dead. So there's a lot of imagination that goes in there. Now, one of the reasons I liked this movie when I watched it years ago, because there is, particularly from law enforcement, there is a pain and suffering that the survivors go through, that most people who've never experienced a serious crime or victimization, that it's hard for them to understand. Just move on. It'll be okay. There's a lot of emotion that goes with this. And I think this movie shows that. Maybe this wasn't the best vehicle to show those emotions, but we've talked about these emotions in the context of law enforcement, losing somebody. But this happens with victims as well, right, Danny?
That's correct. One of the things that it brought out for me, and it shows that law enforcement, we don't really take in account the feelings of the victims and the long-term feeling. This movie went on over a period of time. And in the beginning, the detectives and the police were pretty much there for the family. But as time went on and the investigation fell almost into a cold case, it was more of, I got other things to do, and you guys are the victims, and you're going to have to deal with that because I got to move on and do my job. So we're kind of helpless or useless to the person on understanding how they really feel and their emotions and everything. Mark Wahlberg played it great, because I can see how someone would get so upset over, something happened to one of their children. It happened to you or me, one of our kids, or one of my grandkids. Now,
Yeah.
I would be worse than Mark Wahlberg was. So.
Well, and
But it does show that we're not real apathetic to our victims over time.
Well, I think that our role is different, and that, and one, we're not really prepared to do that. I mean, we understand the pain of the victims. Heck, I mean, as we've talked about as you've been on, most cops have been victimized multiple times if they worked, and we're supposed to tough it up and move forward, right? That's how we handle it. And, but I don't think we're really equipped. We're not the best service to handle that, right? That should be somebody else. And at this, so we're talking 1960s, early 1970s on this one. 1973, I think, is when this murder's supposed to happen. So we were not quite as enlightened back then on these issues. Do you agree?
Exactly. This actually, I think it was, she said it was, I died on December 6th, 1972. And in 1972, things were a lot different.
Yeah.
These days we do have outlets to give help to our victims. We have the chaplaincy. We have different social service programs that we could introduce to our victims and everything. Back then, they were flying off the cuff. They had no clue. I was an explorer in 1972, and the cops, they didn't have anything other than it was just the cops and the detectives, and no programs, no nothing. So it was a big difference.
Well, I was 10. I just let you know that. So
okay, well, I'm a day
not quite
or
there
two
yet.
older than you.
Okay, so we got Slasher Fred made a comment here. Let's see if you guys ever see that short film called Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge. It appears that the guy escaped from execution, and in this movie, it appears that the main character escaped from the pedophile. He escaped, right? The main character.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what you mean by that, but
because the way the scene is portrayed, when you see her running,
yeah,
you believe, oh, she escaped. No, she
no,
was
she
there
didn't.
at that moment.
Yeah, well, that's true, and that was a confusing part. We're also joined by Martin. He's going to pinch hit today. I couldn't get a second guess on Martin. Read the movie. He had some comments early on before we opened the show, and what he thought of the film, and so we'll get his thoughts too from a non-law enforcement standpoint. But let's throw the first scene here, and it just kind of there's some interesting things here because obviously when you grow up in the 60s and 70s, there's things you notice. I mean, just the little things you see, the carpeting, I mean, they did a pretty good job of the wallpaper. Yeah, it was all 70s. I think shag rugs, there's just a lot of stuff in there. I mean, the station wagon, we grew up, with the station wagon because I had 5 siblings, and we didn't wear seatbelts. Everybody packed in and squeezed in. And I remember going on family vacations, and we had 2 car top carriers on the top. We had bike racks on the front, bike racks on the back. I was in the back with all the luggage, and my sibling, I was the only boy. My sisters were in the middle seat, and we were all crammed, and it was loud and it was noisy. And it was in the station wagon, right? And we looked like the Clampetts when we went up north to vacation at some shack. I used to say, hey, we if you know Monopoly, Baltic Place and Miranda Place, those are the very first, very cheapest things. That's where we vacationed, right? Everybody else went to the boardwalk and Park Place, not us. We went to the Baltic. But hey, that's growing up blue collar, and I kind of see this. Although I think he's an accountant or whatever he is in this, so he's probably got a little bit more money. But it just reminded me of a little bit of growing up in the 60s and 70s. What do you think, Danny? You're probably a little more aware of this stuff at the time because you're a few years older than me.
Yeah, well, thank you. Where did you put Grandma? You didn't tie her to the roof, did you?
No, we didn't.
I watched that movie too.
No, Grandma did not come with us on vacation. We didn't have any room for her. I mean, one year a buddy of mine came, and so we were all crammed in the back.
Man.
I mean, I swear to God, we look like the Clampetts. That's what.
Yeah. Yeah, back when growing up, I was born in Kansas, Wichita, Kansas, and my parents moved. Thank God they moved us to Southern California in the early 60s. But our family vacations for the longest time was Easter vacation, drive to Kansas. Summer vacation, spend a week in Kansas. Christmas, spend a week in Kansas. And my dad, we had a 63 Mercury Comet. So it would be about the size of a mid-sized car. And I have 3 brothers. And we'd pack up in those cars. And my dad would always go to one of the packing houses and buy cases of oranges and grapefruit and stuff. And this part, we were sitting on cases of oranges and stuff in the backseat of this car and driving 22 hours straight to Kansas. And so I can understand those days. But
that's the way it did it back then.
Simpler times.
Yeah, most people don't. I mean, we would get up there, and it was a lot of farmland where obviously Michigan had a lot of lakes. That's where I grew up at. So you always were vacationing on a lake somewhere. And like I said, ours was the cheap lake that we were on. But we would go and pick cherries and strawberries, and we'd have strawberry shortcake or cherry pie. My mom would make all that stuff for us, and that's what our dessert was all week. We didn't eat out.
What was that?
So anyway, I looked at this movie. It just reminded me of some of that. I think in one of these scenes, Martinez shows the 1964 Mustang convertible, which indicates that he was probably making a little more. That was the first year, if you know anything about Mustangs, that was the first year that they actually made the Mustang convertible, right? The Mustang. And so obviously a classic car. It was really cool to see her. And it also implies, the other thing that I noticed, and I don't know if you guys both know this, Martin, I didn't, how old are you now? Are you in this range? When were you even a twinkle in your parents' eyes in the 60s?
Oh no, I am 51. I used to say that I'm a 1973 model, vintage. And yeah, so I grew up in 70s, 80s. And the aesthetic is the 70s. There's something about the aesthetic of the 70s.
Well, yeah, the bell-bottom pants, all that whole look, the long hair.
However, I got to see my parents' pictures in the 60s. Oh, those were wild days.
Yes, it was completely the free love. And you kind of see that a little bit with Susan Sarandon. Now, I got to tell you, there's Susan Sarandon is one of the actresses. She plays the grandma in this case. So I was working a war demonstration. I was a lieutenant. It was 2003. I think we were going into, I want to say going into Afghanistan, right?
It was 2003 was going into Iraq, I believe.
Maybe it was Iraq. Maybe it was earlier than that. Maybe it was 2000. Because I worked so many war demonstrations. Maybe it was 2002. But it was definitely going into Afghanistan because of the comments. And I was lieutenant in charge. I had a platoon of guys back, ready to go in case something happened. And then I had another, not a platoon, the squad. And then I had another squad. We were working the crowd. And I worked the crowd. I had a plan where there were pinch points to get to the federal building in LA. And I always made sure that I had guys at the pinch points, and we would take away the sticks, because they had signs on a stick. And I read the law, and I go, okay, you can't take away the right to freedom of expression, but there's certain rules on sticks and things like that. And so, I would rip the sign off, give them back the sign. Here's your right to freedom of expression, but I would take the stick away if it didn't fit the criteria, right? Just pissed people off. But then I would walk around the crowd and the people we missed, and I had this big old sergeant with me, and we would take it away. And I'm listening to Susan Sarandon gets on the stage, and she's married to Tim Robbins at the time. And she starts this whole narration how September 11th was our fault. We deserved this. We shouldn't go into this. Her and who was that guy? Lou Grant? Or no, who was that? It was that guy that played Ed Asner. He was there too. And prior to this event happening, I had this great sergeant work for me. He planned it out, but he told the reporter, if somebody burns a flag there, we're taking him to jail. And I'm like, oh God, the guy's killing me, because you can burn the flag per the Constitution, per the Supreme Court, as your own flag, that is, as an expression of protest, right? And he's saying so then I got these guys. So I had these reporters following me around to see if we're going to arrest people that were burning flags, right? And I got this LA Times reporter, right, he's like right on my shoulder the whole time, just following me around. And he hears her say this, and he says to me, he goes, can you believe she says that? They attacked us. And I'm thinking, this guy's setting me up. I said, you said that, brother, not me. Because I wanted to say, I agree with you. But if I said it, I'm going to be in the LA Times the next day, right? This guy
with your picture, front page.
With my picture, yeah. Lieutenant shouts down Susan Sarandon and says, So, anyways, that's my Susan Sarandon story. So, I don't really have a lot of compliments to say about Susan Sarandon. I guess she is a good actress, but in terms of her critical thinking, in terms of political politics, I'm not really all that impressed. But anyway, so that's my Susan Sarandon story. What do you think, Danny? Not unusual, right?
I've only seen a couple of her movies that she's in, and she always plays a drunk tramp. So
Okay.
I'd like to see her telling that to the 5,000 families that lost someone there.
Yeah. I mean, it's you can say whatever you want. I mean, the leftists twist everything that goes wrong in the world is the U.S.'s fault because the U.S. projects soft power outward. If they just didn't do that, we would, it's like, okay, have you ever read history from 1900 to 1920? Are not being engaged, and we ended up in World War One. And then we pulled back an isolationist between World War One and World War Two, and then we ended up in war again. And then after World War Two, we decided, okay, we're gonna push some power outward. Even though we've had a lot of hot spots around the world, we haven't had a global conflict like that again. And part of it is because of the policies of the United States, not always perfect, not always saintly, but certainly much more thoughtful than Susan Sarandon gives anybody credit for. Okay, that's all right. I guess I'm preaching, but that's well, I don't know, Martine, you're a global guy. What do you think? Think I'm right on that one or no? I got him.
Let's talk about it afterwards.
Let's talk about it afterwards.
Yeah, I don't want to get the channel shadow ban by YouTube.
Okay, we won't do that.
Let's go back to simpler times and
let's go back to simpler times. Okay, so hey, the
farm in Kansas in the 70s.
The farm in Kansas in the 70s, yeah, and oranges and cherries and strawberries.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we actually had to go in the field, and you go in and you pick all your strawberries and you put them, and it was like 50 cents a thing, so strawberry shortcake every night. So her starting out, as she tells the story, one of the things that I remember when I listened to this is when she says, my name is Salmon like the fish, first name Susie, I was 14 when I was murdered. Yeah, that's such a catch line, right? Just boom. Okay, I got to hear this story. Do we have that? And
I think yes.
When I was murdered, yeah, we do. And I actually did Danny R. Smith's book, Nothing Left to Prove. I don't know if you read it, Danny.
Oh, that's a great book.
And he just starts out about, heads hanging in trees, and, and he talks about his breakdown right at the beginning, which then, okay, well, what caused this guy to break down? And then you end up reading the entire book, right?
Right.
And I felt this about this line too. Okay, I want to hear what happens to this little girl. Because, I mean, it opens up, she's just a typical, teen, early teen, and looking at boys and shopping. Of course, she's a girl, and and it actually shows a really cool scene where here's the point I wanted to get to about simpler times. It may have been simpler times, but even when you were preteen or teens, there were a lot more expectations on us at the time. I think I started working at 14. You had to do dishes. You had to, there's chores you had to have in a big family. I think we moved away from that a little bit for our kids and became a little more helicopter parents. But the fact that she sees her brother have this problem, and then she jumps in the 64 Mustang, which is cool, and drives him to the hospital is, I think the expectation that you would grow up quicker from my generation actually was there more so than the current generation. I don't know what you think about that, Danny, but that's how I felt looking into this, because all of my siblings, we all started working at 13 and 14, and we were held to certain expectations of getting things done. And I kind of saw that in that scene. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, you're right. I grew up as a boomer, or I am a boomer, I should say. My parents were the greatest generation. And the morals and standards that they implied to us, a great work ethic. I started working with my dad pouring concrete. That was his side job, because back then, when you're raising 4 boys, Rockwell wasn't paying enough, obviously. And his side job was pouring concrete. And at 10 years old, I'm out helping him put up forms and pouring concrete, and wasn't really getting paid for it, but I was earning my keep at home.
Yeah.
But those are what we were raised with. You get up in the morning and you make your bed, you wash your face, you eat breakfast. Mom's in the kitchen, she's making breakfast and lunches for everybody, and it's off to school. And then at night, after when the 5:30 is when my dad ate, so 5:30 was dinner time. If you're late, you're not eating. And you sit down at the table, you sit in the same spot every night, and every day when dinner's over, you help clean off the table. Just make it everything easier for my parents. And my mom, she's an amazing woman. She's 93 years old, and I just visited with her a couple of days ago, and she would be in the kitchen cleaning up after us for hours afterwards. But we'd be weekends, we'd be out pulling weeds, and we'd be out doing things around the house. And then as I got older, also I was involved in Boy Scouts, and my dad was one of the scout leaders, and so we had a lot of mentorship and leadership training then, and that kind of morphed into becoming an Eagle Scout and then getting into law enforcement. But times were totally different. Nowadays, I look at my grandkids and they're sitting there on their smartphones, and there's no communication between them. I took my granddaughter, she's 17. My wife and I took her out to dinner a couple of nights ago, and we actually had a conversation because she left her phone in her purse. And my wife left her phone in her purse, and mine was in my pocket. So we had a meaningful conversation and enjoyed it. And those are things that kids these days, and even the generation before the millennial, their generation, when they were kids, they didn't have the same experiences that we have.
Yeah, I think the other thing, when in both these scenes, they're running around the entertainment or the other kids on the block. There's much more engagement going outside. I mean, my mom kick us out and say, "Don't come home until the street lights are on," right?
Exactly.
So it was, it was a different experience. I will say, when I moved to California, I was 19, and I had worked since I was 14, and my grandparents had lived through the Depression, and they knew I didn't have any money. I was coming out on a wing and a prayer, right? And from Michigan. And so my grandpa said, "Okay, come on over and paint my garage." And it was an interesting experience because my grandpa supervised every stroke because, he wasn't healthy enough to do it himself, but he would have over the years, right? But he had to get, I'd do 2 hours of painting. Now, granted, I worked at a school, so I painted every summer at the school. We'd paint all the classrooms and stuff. So I knew how to paint, but I got to paint my grandpa's way, right? And but at 2 hours into it, my grandma would come out with cheese and cracker and a beer at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I'd take a little bit of break, and then I'd go back to painting, and same thing at noon. A sandwich, some soup, another beer, some crackers, some cheese, and and then of course, a mid-afternoon break. By the time I went home, I was a little drunk. My grandpa would never let me clean his brushes, right? He cleaned his own brushes because he had those same brushes since 1900, I think. And but you know what? They couldn't just give me money, and they paid me $250 to paint their garage. It took me way more weekends than it should have because of it was also a chance to visit with me. But that's how they did it then, right? And I don't know, Martine, you've heard me and Danny talking about the old days. What do you think?
Yeah, I remember living through some of that when our parents involved us in everything they did. I remember disassembling brakes, and that is why I do not speed because
Yeah.
I know how a brakes works, and I know how the brakes cannot work instantly. So no, and painting. I remember putting on wallpapers and that, but mostly painting.
Painting, yep.
Yeah, and of course that thing that you could be on the street till 6, 7 p.m. Nah, and in those days it was safer, to be honest.
Yeah.
Now,
you were.
now in my street, when one girl was almost kidnapped at noon,
Yeah.
she escaped by the skin of her teeth. So is you have that problem too.
Yeah. Well, I think keeping people busy, keeping them off the internet, because that's where a lot of the predators are
Mm.
now. I mean, this story could switch to some kind
Oh,
of internet grooming, and it wouldn't be quite the same. We got a good comment from D. Bud Martin. Let's see. Having parents who lived through the Depression and World War II makes you appreciate the real hardship people go through in the past. Kids today don't seem to have that. Yeah, I would agree with that. I
That
would
is
think
very,
even
very true.
mm,
some adults don't understand that too. But it was a different time in the 60s and 70s. I mean, in going into the 80s, I mean, crime, there was a lot more disorder, disruption, there was a lot more crime, but families were a lot bigger as well. And that's just the way it was at the time. And I mean, you had, would you say, three siblings, Danny?
Yeah, I have three brothers.
And I had five sisters.
Yeah.
Martine, any siblings?
oh well,
Don't tell me you're going to double up.
in my no, in my parents' marriage, no, they divorced,
Ah,
and each of them went and married again. And from my father's side, I have had three siblings, two sisters and one brother.
wow.
Sadly, one of my sisters passed away in a car accident. And by my mom's side, I have a brother and a sister.
Yeah. So, the replacement rate is supposed to be 2.1. I don't know if you know that.
Mm.
I didn't quite hit the replacement rate for nationally for society. Do you understand what I'm
Well,
talking about?
yeah,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
it have to have 0.1 child.
Yeah. So, so your parents, even though they're divorced with their other spouses, they beat
Yeah.
that average. I didn't quite beat it. I only had two kids. I didn't have 2.1, but
Yeah, you could have been like my wife. She has 13 brothers and sisters. So there's 14
Wow.
total in your family.
my wife she has seven siblings.
Yeah,
So that, like I said, different time.
Yeah, they didn't have any television in Michoacan, Mexico for
Mm.
my wife and her family. So,
Those must have been crazy summers.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, one
And
of the
the
things
gatherings, oh my God. You
yeah,
imagine the grandchildren that you will have if you have 13 children.
Oh,
I
Oh,
think her mom had 55 grandchildren, and she knows the numbers.
oof.
55 grandchildren, and a bunch of great grandchildren. So
yeah, you got to go
I
through
would
some.
say I'm not giving gifts on Christmas. I'm sorry.
exactly. We were talking about the simpler times, and since this movie took place in 1972, growing up in the 60s and becoming a young teenager in the 70s, we were taught not to get in cars with strangers, not to hang around with strangers.
Yeah.
Everything was strangers. And it's kind of ironic in this story is, the neighborhood, there was like probably 10, 15 houses on the cul-de-sac that I lived in. And it was never an issue with going to any of our neighbors' houses at any given time. If one of the parents would ask, hey, can you help me out with doing something? It was not a big deal. And in this instance here, this guy was a neighbor. The suspect, he
Yeah.
knew the parents, everybody kind of, so it kind of took away from that. We were raised not to hang out with strangers and everything. And this girl, she didn't really figure it out until too late.
Way too late. Well, let's roll that scene, serial killers, and talk a little bit about it. And I think the important thing about what people need to understand is usually the person who kills you, in some way. In this case, she knew him, right?
Yeah,
Look,
exactly.
Hey,
we have Danny Regalado.
Danny Regalado, welcome back. I'm glad you like the movie. I like the movie too. It's got a little supernatural element to it, but it's instructive in a lot of ways. And but so he's from the neighborhood, as you said, Danny. And if you pay attention to a lot of the crime shows they have on, you find out that that's where they start their hunting ground is
That's correct.
right around them, right? If they become if you look at it like Ted Bundy, he operated initially in the area that he was from, area that he knew, area that he was familiar with, and the community around him where he kidnapped these college. He was comfortable on a college campus. He was a college student, and that's where he started his murders from, where they hung out at places that he was comfortable with. Clearly, the guy lives in the neighborhood. He's comfortable. He's watching. This guy is, I wrote my notes. Organized serial killer. He's clearly an organized serial killer. He's done this before. You can see all the planning that he puts into this stuff. And this is it's not like cops get to run across these guys every day. These are the kind of guys like Danny R. Smith might run across, guys working homicide. Even those guys, it's going to be limited because they might get serial killers, but like the street, whatever, L.A. slasher, that guy. Those are more.
The hillside slicks.
Well, the hillside guys those guys that was Bianchi and those guys were organized serial killers. Yeah. They planned it out really well. But then you got what's it, Bonin and some of these other guys where they would get guys drunk. They did some planning, but it wasn't quite as organized. It was sloppy. I think they were targeting gay men, or not gay men, Marines. He would target Marines down in Pendleton. And but this guy clearly was an organized serial killer in the neighborhood, and he's just watching and waiting for his opportunities is what comes on. But there's always the guy on the block that you're a little curious about that isn't as friendly. That there's this natural aversion thing that I think human beings have. Like, let me stay away from that guy because I don't know about him, right? And I'm sure some of that existed, and that kind of comes out in the movie. Okay, that guy's a little odd. We'll kind of stay back. He doesn't have kids. He doesn't have a wife. So we'll just kind of stay away from him. Even though he's in the neighborhood, he acts friendly and engaging. There was a little bit of aversion to him, right? Did you? Yeah.
Yeah. When she was taking the picture, she kind of commented that this guy's a little weird.
Right.
I think she made that comment in the mall too. When she introduced him, this is my killer. And she kind of alluded that he was a little weird.
And if you see him when he does eventually, he traps her in his underground fort or whatever you wanted to call it, his dungeon that he was going to do this, and he planned it out, and she was his target all along for this event, and he had. You learn later on in the movie he had killed many people, many women and or girls, and he picks his target. He takes his time, and that's why he's an organized serial killer. And as she confronts him in the cornfield, she's leery. She kind of wished she'd have kept up with the other girl up front. She got distracted because she dropped a note from her, her first love, this puppy love thing she had going on with this boy at school, and she was trying to get it. And that's his opportunity. And he's probably been staking it out for weeks to get her. What do you think, Martin?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like it's. I know I'm gonna make a reference to another fictional character, but you have Hannibal Lecter. When she's talking to Clarice Starling, he says very clearly to her, "We covet what we see."
Yes.
That implying that that is how the serial killers operate. They organize one.
Yeah.
They have their hunting grounds, which is where they hang out, see something or someone, call their attention, and then start to follow them to establish patterns, and they begin to formulate a strategy to how to get that precise person.
Yeah,
it's horrifying because I always tell my girls, there's always someone watching you, always, and we don't know who it is, but it's always somebody's watching us.
Yeah, and of course, teenagers and kids are vulnerable targets, right? And he lures her into this thing, which is what's the whole "don't take candy from strangers" kind of thing. And maybe this was before Stranger Danger, and she is leery, but she's enticed by this creation that he allegedly made for the community, and he traps her in there. And as soon as he closes the door, she knows. She knows I screwed up.
Yeah. She says that at the beginning that this happened in a time where before the missing kids were on milk cartoons, because that wasn't unthinkable. Nobody thought that somebody could do something like that.
Right. And but and here's the thing, you have an adult predator, organized serial killer and he's competing with a 13-year-old
Mm.
who, I'd like to think I was really brilliant at 13, but I wasn't. I made stupid mistakes, did things I shouldn't have did. And as you get older, you learn, right? You learn from your experiences, and you become more guarded, and you become more worldly, is a word that people use. Right, Danny? That's why children who are more trusting are targeted, right? I mean, it isn't just the sexual attraction; it is also the ease to control and
Mm.
capture, right?
That's correct. And back in that time, um, I think we were more trusting than they are now, and that's because of how the baby boomers and the Generation X's, um, we kind of like changed the thought process of kids. When I was growing up, during the summertime, my brother and we'd get on our bikes and we'd ride down to the beach, which was about, probably 13, 14 miles away. We'd ride our bikes up into the hills. We'd disappear all day long. A very good friend of mine, he lived a block over. At 12 years old, he was jumping in vans with some stranger his mom didn't know. And he'd get in these vans, and then the guy would drop him off on a corner with a bucket of flowers, and he'd sell flowers all day long. And that's just how it was, because we were more trusting of people than now. Now, in the generations afterwards, we as boomers found out that, hey, we were pretty stupid doing those things, and we're going to teach our kids a little bit. Don't be so much trusting.
Well, as you have less of them, you tend to be,
Yeah.
we used to ride our bikes to a place we called Frog's Paradise, so it was this swampy area with hills, and you'd ride your bike down
Yeah.
before they had BMX bikes, and you'd crash. But also I'd go hand out domino pizza flyers with some guy we really didn't know who was paying a couple bucks to, you put out 1,000 flyers on the block and you get a couple bucks. So yeah, I did that. You're in the city of Detroit, was actually not the safest place around. But that's, we were oblivious to that, and my dad was a cop, so I don't know. He wouldn't let me be a paper boy. He didn't like that because he said too many paper boys are getting robbed. Uh,
Oh,
so
that's interesting.
he was protective in some ways, but in other ways. But he was working 2 jobs. He was gone half the time.
Yeah.
Most of the time just working. And but let's roll into the scene hunting grounds, because I kind of wanted to get into this. And you see her in the cornfield, right? So this guy planned it out. One, I didn't understand how, there was some, so he creates this fort, and he puts, this roof on it, and these corn, I go, well, okay, somebody's going to find that. I mean, that's not going to stay hidden for very long, but, for the movie's sake, he does it. And, I couldn't help when I saw this. I read a book years ago. I don't know if you got the, the face of the book. It's called The Blooding, and it's a Joseph
Oh yes,
Wambaugh book.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I saw that.
let's
me
do it.
let
And
me
the
post it.
blooding is, here she is. She's getting enticed by him, and the blooding was
Here's the book.
there it is, by Joseph Wambaugh. And I was reading Joseph Wambaugh stuff a lot there for a while, and this is actually a true story. You can go ahead and take that down. And so this was a cut through. The cornfield was a cut through for these kids to get to their house. And with the serial killer in the blooding, there was a cut through a forested area where the kids would use to make it easier for them to get to the house. So they would go off the roadway, and this was in England. They'd go off the roadway and just do this cut through. And this serial killer knew that, just like this guy knows it. And that's where he would set his trap. Now, this guy actually, Colin Pitchfork, that's really his name. He killed 2 girls that they know of, 15 and 16, I believe. And the interesting thing of why Joseph Wambaugh did the book on him is he was the very first person who was identified by DNA and convicted based upon DNA. So it's an excellent book. It's a true story. I just read up on the guy. They're talking about letting him out again, and the Home Secretary of England is trying to stop all that. But because they think he's good for more murders, they just don't know. But what I saw here was he knew where the kids went. He laid his trap. Colin Pitchfork did the same thing. He knew where the cut through for the kids. He laid the trap. And, so parents, they need to pay attention to the patterns of their kids and watch what's going on. And in 73 and in England, it's the cut through how they get home. Now everybody drives and picks up their kids, and, there ain't that many kids walking to school anymore. I mean, it still does happen, but a lot less of it now these days. But it's the online pathways. that you got to watch out for, right? It's the chat rooms, or not chat rooms anymore. It's what are they? It's just these different websites that they have to draw kids in. It's the gaming platforms that anybody can go on and communicate with your kid on. They could do it via Xbox. There's so many ways for predators to connect with your kids, and we hear about these stories all the time. But they're the new hunting ground. Are these online communities, these online pathways. Danny, you want to comment on that? You agree with that? And
that is true. Something I heard yesterday, the day before, about the same thing. How good technology is, and technology is actually pretty great. But there's always a dark side to technology, and the dark side is what you're talking about. These pathways, or these websites, these different apps that the kids are using to, they turn out innocently so they can talk to each other, but then you get into the dark portion of that where the people are trolling all the time. And it always got me that an adult could sit there and act like a kid, but then now I'm seeing that the law enforcement adults are acting like kids too, so they could get the adults that are acting like a kid. So it's weird. I'm glad to see that law enforcement and the federal government's kind of taking an eye to this.
Right.
And you go to something like TikTok. There's probably some pretty good things about TikTok, but there's some things that aren't so great about it, and I'm not going to get too deep into it. But it's just a platform that probably needs a lot cleaning up, and it needs more control by our authorities instead of authorities from another country that wants to annihilate us. But that's my own thought.
Martine, you got kids you're still raising kids, right? What do you, how do you control those pathways where the predators are at, the online pathways in your mind? How do you do that?
Well, my youngest, she had 21, so I'm almost out of the woods. But I had a situation like that. Like what? I would say 10 years ago, 10, 11 years ago. One of my girls, she had 12, 14 years, and she was chatting with another kid on YouTube. No, YouTube, no, on
Another
Facebook.
person.
Yeah, with another person. And I had the chance, because it was pure chance. I was making maintenance in her computer, and I could see some of the conversations, and I knew this is an adult. This is not a kid.
Yeah.
They talk like a kid for a while, but then from time to time they direct the conversation to another grounds, pointing to make your kid leave the house. And I talked to her. This is not a kid. This is an adult predator. And man, when I first got in Mexico, to me was a shock to see on the light posts and the very few public phone that remain always are poster of missing girls.
Yep.
All the time. And that put the fear of God in me, man. I gotta tell you. I still got it.
Yep. Well, I could tell you, I raised a son and a daughter, and at the time I was running, when they started getting into computers, I was actually running a computer network. So Danny Coon's hearing all this interesting things about me. I moved away from technology because people stopped seeing me as a good street cop because I could do nerdy stuff, right? I'm like, what are you talking about?
You can do both,
I don't want. Okay, if you're going to see me differently because I know how to,
you can have a propeller on your helmet.
Partition a hard drive. Then I said, okay, well I'm done doing that stuff. But one of the things I had learned is, how you can set up rights in a computer so your kids can go to certain areas. And so I limited what they could do. And then I had to know their password. And if I said, step away, let me look and see what you're looking at. And then I kept the computer in a common area. So it was before cell phones and iPads and stuff like that. So I put certain rules in place to guarantee a certain amount of control, and that there was no certainty of privacy for them. So it became one of the things the guy said in the movie, no adults are allowed. So here she is, she's already murdered and she's running away. Well, that's what they're going to do in these sites too. They're going to say, hey, don't tell your parents, right?
Yeah.
And you have to set it up that there is nothing is private, and I mean, we put locks on our kids' doors, but they said if you abuse the lock, then the door comes off, right? So, you have to tell them there is nothing private, in this home in terms of what your use on the computer, and I have a right to see everything because that's my computer, and I'm here to raise you, and there are bad people out there, right? And you have to be very forceful with that because kids, as they get older, they think that they should be private, and these predators, as Martine talks about, act like they're just kids. But in reality, there's so many predators. You have to have these kinds of rules in place. And I now that I'm thinking about it, I probably should have brought a list of things that we could have advised the community on what you need to do to protect yourself from online predators, because that's what we're talking about these days. Yes, you do still have stranger abductions. Those things still happen. But a lot of these predators have gone online, right? So, but anyways, they are online. You can look them up, but actually having control over your kid's device, and a rule that you should be able to look at whatever is on their device at any time. And if they don't give you the password, they don't let you do it, then they lose the device. So that's probably my number one rule, right? What do you think, Danny? That's a good rule, right?
That is some great rules, and like I said, it's okay to be a geek. It's okay to have a propeller in your head. I do. So, some of the boringest training I've ever been to, but it's been very noteworthy or good to learn, good to know about, was going through the Center of Missing and Exploited Children. Some of their IP tracking classes, and some of their how to bring up different websites and go into the dark web and everything like that. That was some very interesting training. I have some friends that did the last probably 10, 12 years of their career in Family Crimes Bureau or child abuse. That's all they did was work with the Center for Missing Children, Exploited Missing Children, doing that work. So that's just somewhere where we have to go, and parents, they're getting more educated to a point, but in this generation where you have both parents having to work, and especially when you have parents now, they're in jobs where one parent may be home during the daytime, then work at night, and then the other one's will work at day, and just you never have continuity in the family. So one parent doesn't know what the other parent's doing in the first place.
Yep.
Or they're both at work, and they'd have no idea. Their kids are, what was the term back in the 80s and 90s? Latchkey kids. Yeah. And you have a lot of that. And I live in an area, it's an upscale area, and there's upper middle class to wealthy people, and it's the same with them. There, you don't see these. You see the young mothers out and about because they just had their babies, but after the kids get about 1 or 2 years old, they're back into the employment world and have a nanny or a babysitter or an older sibling taking care of the younger ones, and you just can't have that, and that's where the trouble starts. So I agree. You need to set up some type of stuff in their computers. Let them know who's boss.
Yep.
The locks on our doors when I was a kid, oh no, we didn't even shut our bedroom doors. My wife.
Well, the thing is it's tough because you want to not be helicopter parents, because we did a whole discussion about the need to let kids grow and give them responsibility. But at the same time, you got to be nosy, because there are still threats that they may not understand out there. So there is a balance, from when we were raised to, get out of the house, come home when the streetlights are on, too. no, don't go to the house unless I'm with you, right? I mean, there's a balance somewhere in the middle, and you got to be a little nosy, particularly with the new technology, and that's where the predators are at.
Yeah,
It's kind of like anything else. So you got a dating app. You were just had the available ladies that in your community. Now everybody's available. The predators, it's the same kind of thing, right?
Dude, I can't grasp that concept of the dating app. Are you crazy? Do you want to end up in a ditch? Because that is how you end up in a ditch. No,
Exactly.
I'm gonna go out with a completely stranger, and we're gonna have drinks. Are you nuts?
I found myself alone after 50, and they worked well for me. But I agree with you. But I'm a guy,
It's a,
you know. I'm
it's a
5'11", 200
yes.
pounds. At the time, it's like, okay, I'm meeting them at a public place. I'm not doing anything stupid.
Yeah, you're not a kid. Yeah,
And I'm not a
Yeah.
kid, and yeah, I'm not a girl, and yeah, and even some of the guys, they get picked up and they get robbed and all that other stuff. And it's funny, I ended up remarrying, but I remarried somebody that I knew from being a kid. My beautiful wife, she's upstairs working. Hola, Patricia. And and it was the trust was the biggest issue, but I trusted her because I knew her when she was a kid, and she's still the same nice person, right? So, and that's, but okay, let's get back to the movie. Okay, so one of the things that I see here is they do canvass the neighborhood, which is typical, right? You canvass the neighborhood. They understand what happens when our process when a kid is missing is you check out everything, right? And you look everywhere, you check out their friends, and they kind of do this stuff. They check. Here's our serial killer, and I have to say, this guy Steve Tucci, I think is his name. He
Stanley.
actually Stanley Tucci. He was nominated for an Academy Award. He didn't win it, and he does have a great series. He had a great series going. I think it was on HBO. That was Stanley Tucci's Searching for Italy, in which he would go around Italy and sample the local cuisine, which I always thought is fantastic because I've been to Italy a couple of times. And
Oh my god, horrible job. Who wants to do
yes, I know. And then they do it on TV. Yeah, let's try some
I'll get
raviolis from
paid.
here, And he's actually he plays a really bad guy in this thing, but he's actually he's pretty nice in this. He's enjoyable, right? He's engaging and enjoyable. But that's what serial killers are too. They're also engaging, and they can be pleasant if they're trying to suck you in, like like this guy did. And that's the shtick that they had for Ted Bundy too. He could be very charming when he needed to be charming, and with the ladies. And Bundy was good looking too. But they do canvass the neighborhood, and you start to see the guilt of the parents and the hope of the parents that she's still alive, and which are the next big themes of the movie that we're getting into. But the other thing that you also see is there's this trophy. He keeps trophies of his victims, which is typical of serial killers. And here we got the cops are in the show, and he's very calm, which tells you he's probably a little narcissistic. I'm smarter than these guys. And but Danny, what do you think of the scene here?
Yeah, she alluded to it somewhere in the Susie alluded to it somewhere in the movie that he's very arrogant and he thinks he's smarter than the cops and everything. But this was it was kind of awesome because it fits into what the sheriff's department, what we would call a critical missing person, and I think she may have met the criteria. I can't remember all of the criteria for that, but from the time the initial report was written to the canvassing, it was, did they really do that in 72? Because I know we did that now. And the questions he asked on the form, are you having any problems with your daughter? They were almost like right off our missing persons, our missing persons report. But that is pretty much true, where once it goes critical missing, which this was probably met the criteria of, it's all hands on deck. Everybody that's available is going to come and help out and do their best for as long as they can to find it. Now, when I was 14 or 15 years old, I was an explorer with the Orange Police Department. And we had, during the daytime, it was a Saturday, we had gone out and we had, we were passing out flyers at, in parking lots of various malls. We're putting them in cars with, had their windows rolled down, letting them know about the auto theft. When we got back to the Orange Police Department, we were gaffled up and taken out to a scene of a missing child. It was a 2 or 3 year old baby. And even the explorers, we got involved in that, and we worked that till probably around midnight, 1 a.m, just canvassing the neighborhood and everything like that. Turns out the parents were the people that killed the baby, and that's a total different story. But that's what you do with missing kids. You go out and you do your best and to find out what's going on. And you're exactly right. Serial killers and even serial criminals in general will keep some type of trophy from their escapades. And she also alluded into this, that he, as in typical with serial killers and people who do serial crimes, serial rapists and serial child abusers, they will go and they will do their crime, do their thing, and then they'll just be normal until that light comes back on again, and then they'll go out and do it again. And in the serial murder type thing, this guy escalated probably early in his career as a child molester, as he escalated from going from just getting his jollies by raping some girl or some kid. He moved on, and once he killed a kid, you can't go any higher than that. So everything that he does after he killed the first kid is that kid's going to die. And that's a typical with serial killers, and it's just very sad. And I wouldn't have the patience to dig a hole, 6 feet deep and 8 feet wide and 8 feet long and 4 feet wide, but like he did. But he was very deliberate in everything he did.
Well, that was his foreplay. That was his lead up to it, right? That was his courting. That was all that stuff, and that he's doing. Hey, Martine, I think we're time for a break, but we'll pick up with comments when we get back from you. Okay.
Okay. Let me take the banner on, and we're gonna have a 2 minutes break. We'll see you after that.
Okay.
Meet the Seattle Vigilante. Like so many comic heroes, this warrior hides his identity. But his identity isn't the only secret he has to keep. After grievous wounds received during combat, Tier 1 operator John Russell begins to recover and comes to terms with his new reality of being an amputee. And as he learns how to use his new prosthetic limb, he finds himself caught up in the bureaucratic red tape that too many wounded veterans experience. The exhausting medboard process. Out of sheer frustration, John takes it out on the criminal scum of the city. But when reality kicks in, John realizes he started something that's having an impact on the greater world around him, and thus has to reevaluate his motives. And moreover, just how far is John willing to go to finish this war he's declared against the criminals in Seattle? And will he even survive? From the creator of IDW's award-winning graphic novel Code Word Geronimo comes a new story about a different kind of warrior, Vindicated Inc., the first of its kind disabled veteran action hero comic. The Vindicated Inc. graphic novel crowdfunding campaign on fundmycomic.com is provided in the description of this video. We hope you become a contributor. Please share this link. Thank you.
There's only one location on the internet where you can get it all. Movie, TV, and comic industry. News and rumor analysis. Official scoops from Geekosity magazine. Reviews and interviews. So, when you need it to be Sunday, there's only one place to go, mate. Pop Culture Minefield. Where they're always talking nerdy nerd stuff. Right, jog on then.
Welcome back to Morning Coffee with the Chief. We are reviewing the movie The Lovely Bones. So, Martine, you want to pick it up? I think I was going to leave it up to comments for you. Do you have any comments on just before the break?
Oh yeah, the previous scene.
Yeah.
I like the part in which both the killer and the cop are mm, looking at the dollhouse.
Yeah.
And it's a nice allegory. How you see the cop, this you see him looking for things, and you see the killer looking at the cop, always following the cop.
Yep.
So, because the cop he doesn't suspect this guy, but the killer no. He's onto me, so I had to be onto him.
Yeah.
I like how they manage that in that scene.
Well, if these guys would have been on their game, the homicide cop would have said, "I'll keep him busy. You keep looking around." The partner's just kind of fiddling his thumbs here in this show, the uniform copper. But I'd have been inquisitive. Hey, he let me in. Let me look around a little bit, see how far I can get away with this, because that's how you actually solve crimes a little bit, right, Danny?
That's exactly how you see things. If you can get in,
Yeah.
and if it's what you want is not in that room, if you can get him into the other room to talk to you, so
Exactly. Give you a chance to look around at what is in plain view. And, I think the fact that the guy has a dollhouse would have clued me in. The other thing on this scene is, and the previous scene is the Survivors Guilt and Hope. I had a gal who runs Survivors Inc. on my previous show, and she still deals with the trauma of being victimized by somebody that she brought into her life, a trainer, and then her young son was also victimized, and he still deals with this stuff. So these are life, as we talked about, Danny, these are lifetime wounds that these people will have, even though they didn't experience the violence, they've experienced the loss and the tremendous guilt that their young daughter is gone, and as they find out likely murdered. And that's guilt you carry your whole life, right?
that's correct. The we discussed that when we did the onion field last year, and the wife, and her name escapes me in the movie, her movie name, but she was definitely experiencing some type of why my little girl, why she had answers or had questions that she couldn't answer. She couldn't come to the realization that her daughter is probably dead. She couldn't bear to go into her daughter's room because it would bring back too many memories and too much pain. And so what she did is that she escaped. No, it didn't get into if she got into any type of substance abuse or anything like that, but it did show that she got into something totally different, totally out of her realm, out of her safe space. And it looked like the only thing that she was doing to keep contact was the family was sending her kids postcards. And but she was even when she came back home, she still had this heavy burden on her, and that can only be helped through there's a spiritual realm, and then there's also the secular realm of psychology and stuff like that, where you really need to talk to someone about it and quit holding those feelings in. And I think eventually she got that far, but it's something that's very deep. It's very painful. It's something that leads to suicidal ideation. And if it's not addressed, then it's just going to get worse.
Yeah, and obviously we know more about it now than we knew back in the 70s, but the feelings are the same no matter what generation you're from. If you lose a kid, and it's very stressful on a family, and of course they ultimately stay together. But here's the other thing about the victims that I wrote in my notes that we seem to forget, and I brought up the Polly class case. She was 12, and in this case Susie had just started high school, but she got a chance to have a crush, but she never got a chance to have a kiss. Doesn't go to prom, doesn't get engaged, doesn't get married, doesn't have her own kids. There's things that when you become a young victim, they never experience. And as we allegedly get more enlightened about the criminals who kill people, because they're talking about passing laws that would make the killer of Polly Klaas eligible for parole. Richard Allen Davis, I think is his name. And this is a guy that, mocked the family when he was convicted. He's really a nasty guy. That we would even pass laws that allow guys like that to be eligible for parole is shocking to me, because they took so much away from these families. And that's what bothers me about, I can understand reform for low-level criminals and trying to find a path forward that doesn't always involve incarceration for nonviolent criminals. But when you get into the murderers, I have a lot less tolerance for reforms to, just to get into jail or prison like Richard Allen Davis, because he was a convicted felon multiple times. It wasn't easy. It takes multiple crimes, even back in a more permissive time of the 70s and 80s and early 90s, until we toughened up the laws. It took a lot to end up in prison. You had to be a violent or repeat offender to end up in prison before 3 strikes, and even after 3 strikes. You still got 3 strikes, right? You still got plenty of chances. And so why are we going to give because when they say, oh, because here's what the reformists will say, and here I'm getting on my soapbox, they'll say, we got to give them a second chance. Well, wait a minute. These guys have had a second, a third, a fourth, a fifth, and a sixth chance.
Now they can have their second chance. Just take them out of confined, or take them out of their protective custody and put them in general population, and then that's their second chances. Yes. We all know what'll happen there.
Somehow I think you have a kindred spirit in Martine in that thought too, probably. But what do you think, Martine? You got some daughters out there. These guys need to stay in prison. These really bad guys like this, once they've demonstrated a propensity to killing people, and particularly younger people, we shouldn't be taking chances on these guys, right?
Yeah. I don't know, man. Why prison?
Oh.
This is
Yeah.
this is one of I told you I just have 2. Normally I'm opposed to the death penalty, but pedophiles, no, directly.
Okay, so we're going to jump back to the book. What is it, Leviticus, where child killers, you're going to take them out to the front gate and stone them. That would be well, appropriate.
I'm okay with life in prison. I mean, I'm okay with the death penalty too. But as we see with criminal justice reform, lifetime in prison is no longer lifetime in prison. They just change the rules and let people out and say, oh, yeah, we have to be kinder and gentler, and it's really our fault that these people they're just really victims of society. And, that's not true. That's not true.
What's sick with all these reformists is there's a couple of small communities out in southeastern San Diego County that are inundated with child abuse people being released where they should still be in custody. They're being released to halfway houses. And you have all these halfway houses out in the middle of the desert in these small communities that are now more populated by pedophiles than they are by people that live there. And
Wow.
The supervisor for that area is up in arms. They're fighting judges all the time. Don't release these guys in our community. Send them someplace else. Me personally, when they were talking about building a prison in Los Angeles County, I thought they should just take it all the way out to about the Kern County, Los Angeles County, San Bernardino County line right there and build it there. So it's like 50 miles outside of town. They'd build a 2-lane highway, 1 lane to get there and 1 lane to come back in, with nothing, no fast food places in between. And that would be a good place to build a prison.
Well, it's the fact that there's no more, that you can pass laws and have life without the possibility of parole, and just have this new generation of politicians say, oh no, that's too cruel, we can't do that. And then we just change the rules. And we forget that the victim, in this case, she didn't have her first kiss. She got a crush, but never got the first kiss, never went to prom, never went to a formal dance, never did any of these things. And that is what we're talking about, particularly when we're talking about child murderers. There's so much life that they don't get a chance to live. And hey, I mean, murder of any victim at any time is tragic, because, hey, sure, I'm 62, but I think I got more grandkids coming that I want to spoil, and I want the chance to do that too. So it's any age, but it's particularly poignant when it's a kid that is killed, because there's so many things that we got to experience that they won't. And Go ahead.
You look at sentencing. You know, in California, we're bagging on their system and everything, but you look at what's going on in some of these other states. Is you'll see these guys get arrested, get convicted of first-degree murder or capital murder is what some of these states call them, and they're only getting 10 or 15 years in prison.
Yeah.
And with a parole date of 7.5 years later for capital or first-degree murder, that's insane. And at least we're getting them in there for at least 30 years.
Well, I think the reform, if there's going to be reform, it needs to be with the nonviolent felons, and you focus on those low to recidivate first, and then you take on the medium to high to recidivate who are nonviolent, or the violence is relatively low level.
That's right.
You know, if you look at our state prison now, like there's 95,000 people in there, and I was telling these guys before we started the show, about 20,000 of them, or maybe it was 19,000, are in for some form of murder. And yet our state is focused on trying to rehabilitate those people and push them out. That's what they're doing. So, and they do it and they shame you. Well, we got to support this. This is the right thing to do. This is the humanist thing to do. But hey, what? You know what? In addition to retribution, prisons, in addition to be retribution and punishment, it's also to keep really bad people away from the rest of society. That prisons are for that, and I think it's worth the expense as far as I'm concerned, and to keep the really bad guys in. And I also think that there's room for improvement on the criminal justice system, just not the blanket things that we got going on in the criminal justice system right now. But let's roll the scene. Holly, and she, they don't really explain who Holly is right away, but she's in the other world now, and she's watching her family, and Holly is a girl who's in the other world with her. Now, I immediately think that, okay, this is one of his victims. And we do later find out that she is exactly one of his victims. And they don't really give how it happened with her, or they do a little bit. They give a little briefing on all the victims a little later, I think after this, in a couple scenes. But she's kind of telling her where she's at. And you can go to, it's implied heaven or some kind of other world, right, where everything's nice, but staying here isn't necessarily normal. But she's staying there because she feels like she has to do something, and this is the other world kind of version of this. And if you think about it from the writer's standpoint, there is, when you're a victim like this, I think the writer, and I didn't get a chance to read up on her, but when you think about what the writer's trying to convey here, there is you're powerless as this victim to resolve your issue. And she's given the character some level of power to watch over her family and to try and help them heal and actually do some things in some ways to help maybe save some other victims, right? And that's and certainly her sister, who becomes one of his targets. So I really felt it was a way for the author or people to give the victim some power in a very powerless kind of situation. I don't know, Dan, if you felt that when you watched it. That's kind of how I felt about it.
Yeah, kind of. To me, it was kind of a take on the same situation that Patrick Swayze was in the movie Ghost, and because he was stuck in that in between area that in real life doesn't happen, or at least my belief. And Susie, she's stuck in this area here where she's trying to bring some type of closure, help her parents to get some type of closure and everything. And Holly's just pushing her to say, hey, you got to move on. You got to keep going forward. And what I really got a full understanding of the movie was when she kept seeing the house, the suspect's house, and she'd never go, I can't go in there. I can't go in there. I can't go in. And finally, near the end, she does go in that house. And that's where she discovers all of the other victims. And that's when she realizes something's going on. But she's still not ready to move on forward. She still stays back until she gets her kiss. She brings some closure to her parents. And the suspect ends up not getting in custody, but getting found out.
Well, do you think of the whole victims do feel powerless, right?
Yes.
And if you're a victim of crime and you write a story like this and you give the victim power, that's purposeful on the writer's portion of this, and it does. I think it builds a little bit of hope in these situations, although I think this is a really tragic situation. But it was trying to give that victim power. When I had the lady who runs Survivors Inc., it was about empowering yourself to move beyond being a victim of crime.
Yeah, when as a cop being a victim of a crime, most of the time when you're a police officer or deputy sheriff, you're a victim, it's job related.
Yeah.
Every once in a while we become victims when it's not job related. My house was burglarized, and for the longest time my wife and I had to deal with that because it was just a total violation of everything. You violated me, and it was just a burglary. And so when you move on to being a victim of a sexual assault or something like that, how do you get past that? And that's what this is kind of addressing there. And then it goes on with what you say. She has to do something to get past it. And by writing this supernatural portion in there, that's how she's doing it.
Well, as you see in the scene, you see him also fondling or identify. You can see the trophies particularly the trophy that she has. It's a little charm. And then you realize later that her bones are in the safe, and he would sit down and look at the safe, and he's reliving that event, and that helps to stem his urges, because he relives that is what is implied. So Holly Golightly is the name of the girl. So Martina, you're the movie aficionado. So what character is that? Where did that character come from? Who is that? Who is also called Holly Golightly in the movies?
Come on, Martin.
I don't know.
It's my wife's
Come
favorite
on,
movie.
man.
It's my
Audrey
wife's
Hepburn,
favorite movie.
Come
on, Gerry. I think you punched in at the
I
right
know
time.
it. I know it. I want Martin
All right.
to get it.
Go for it. All right.
I had to jump in on this one. I've been watching it from the back room.
What do you think?
Martin.
All right, Gerry. Since Martine is stumped on Chief Jordan's
Breakfast at Tiffany's.
That's exactly right. And
which, by the way, grammatically is wrong. It should be Breakfast at Tiffany.
Oh, breakfast at so when I went to Italy, we went to Italy this last summer. My wife loves Audrey Hepburn. She loves the movie. She loves Summer. It's Summer in Rome or something like that. Or what's the name of the movie? And
Roman Holiday.
So yeah, Roman Holiday. So we went to the steps there. I forget the name of the steps. And then there was a place where they got gelato ice cream. We went to that place and got gelato ice cream as well. So she's a big fan of Audrey Hepburn.
Yeah, but did you do it on a Vespa?
No, we did not. But we got a picture of a Vespa. That was good enough for me.
That's the whole experience, man. You got to do it on a Vespa.
That was good enough for me.
That famous relief with the hole in the mouth where you stick your hand in. But hey, I just wanted to point out this book. I read this book back in end of 02, 03. I just got in custody of my daughter, Zoe, after a horrible kidnapping, parental kidnapping.
Right.
And I was already on edge. I read that book, and I became so much more diligent of what my daughter was doing and where she was and who had her. Because that book, I mean, it was moving, it made me cry. Then the movie came out, and I love the movie too. But the book is the one that just changed the way I looked at things. And it's a powerful statement about a spirit moving on after being, taken out of this world the way she was, and learning how to let go.
I mean, I saw it as the author who was a rape victim and had read about a 14-year-old girl that was kidnapped and raped and murdered in Pennsylvania, and then wrote this book. And I really feel that the author was trying to give the victim a sense of power and portray that. And there's a lot, and so that's how they did it, because she was in this other world, but she still had some level of control. Hey, Gerry, I'd like you to introduce my guest, Danny Coon. He's been on a few times.
Danny.
How you doing, Gerry? Nice to meet you.
Pretty good.
And Gerry kind of owns the channel, or runs the channel, or manages the channel. And so you like the book, right, Gerry? And
very much so. And I was really surprised they were going to make a film because of the subject matter in this. I'm like, it's dark. And the movie's really good, and the visual aspect of it, I found the film actually more uplifting, and it also has a better karmic payback in the end.
Yeah, the icicle. Yeah, you see the icicle through her other world, so you know it's coming. Something's coming involving an icicle, and then he ends up getting at the end. Well, the next subject I wanted to talk about, and since you've been a victim or you experienced this, is the survivor's anger or the survivor's guilt. I mean, we touched on it a little bit. That happens with victims, particularly the parent. And even the kid, if the kid gets back, they think, "What did I do wrong for this to happen to me?" They struggle with these emotions of well, one, guilt, and then anger and frustration and powerlessness. Do you want to address kind of all that in a little bit of a bubble?
Very similar to the stages of that a person goes through when they've got a disease that's going to kill them. You know, they go through the stages of death, and it's very similar to it.
Right.
The problem with the people like depicted the family, I'm supposing that's what you're talking about,
Yeah.
is the unknown factor. That they don't know for certain if their daughter is dead. They don't have a place to bury her, and it increases that thing. And I've actually said that it's Schrodinger's cat is what it is. If you know anything about it,
No, go ahead, enlighten us.
Schrodinger's cat is in a box, and the cat could be dead or it might be alive inside that box. But there's this state of not knowing. It could be one or the other. It is both alive and dead at the same time because the box is closed and you don't know. It's something that's taught in math, learning to deal with unknown variables. And so you've got the same thing with this story or with any case where, like, I didn't know what was going to happen. I did not believe for a second my daughter was dead while she was kidnapped. I knew they were taking some kind of care of her because they loved her. But there's still this unknown variable that hit me. And later, it was years later, like 4 or 5 years later, I had been diagnosed with PTSD from it. And and then I think, wow, just imagine what these kinds of parents go through. Because this book is always on my mind. I'm always thinking about this book. And I think that it did a better job of talking about life and death than that Robin Williams film that everybody loves. And I really didn't like that film.
Which film was that?
What Dream May Come.
What Dreams May Come. And I just felt that this one was a better story and a better depiction of dealing with those who are alive and those who have left us. And the frustration of the father in particular, because as I recall, he figures it out, doesn't he?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. He finally figures it out, but he gets away. What, Martin?
He doesn't figure this out. He feels it. The spirit of the girl communicates to him that this guy who really figured it out was the sister.
The sister.
Yeah, she put the work and she got the evidence and everything.
And risked her life because I remember that. Oh my God, that scene.
Well, I think the thing that it is, you see the survivor's guilt with the parents. If you hear about abductions, people will stay at the same house for years, hoping because they want it when the person comes home, they want them to know where to go. They keep the bedroom the same. These things all happen, and that when a person's gone without really a lot of answers. In this case, they had there's a lot of blood there, so the likelihood that she was dead, it was implied in the book. But it's that unresolved answer that helps keep stoking the pain and the flame of every day, because you watch some of the shows where they do these true crime things. Yeah, I've been in the same house for 25 years in case he or she comes home, right? They don't want to move on. They can't move on because they don't have anything to help get any kind of resolution. I think that's what you're
and that's the problem. And that the author of LA Confidential, I can't remember his name. Great author. He dealt with that with his own mother.
Oh,
that his mother was murdered, and he's tried to investigate it over and over again. And And he made this statement. He says, "There's no such thing as closure."
I think when he wrote the book Black Dahlia, you see that. I think he wrote a version of that as well.
He did.
Because I did that movie as well, and I read up on him, and he did talk about it. He never quite got resolution as to who killed his wife. There was another movie he did where that was implied. He's investigated his mother. I can't think of the name of the movie now, but I had Buzz on those. Buzz, whose dad worked the Gangster Squad, was on all those shows because they used the Gangster Squad to kind of add some historical context. Buzz from Long Beach Police Department. So I think the next scene. Let's bring up the next scene and talk about trophies, memories.
James Elroy is his name, by the way.
Elroy, that's right. And and I think
I'm going to go. I just wanted to pop in. Because I really am fond of this book, and I'm glad you're doing it.
Well, I'm hoping we're giving it justice here in our review, the movie. Anyways.
I think so. I think you're doing a good job. All right, guys. I'll see you later. Nice meeting you again, Danny.
Nice meeting you too, sir.
Adios.
Bye, Gerry.
Ciao.
Let's see. Okay, let's do the comment. Let's see. That must be Gerry that wrote that. You guys, yes. I love this book and that film. Okay, so he expressed his comments there. And he dealt with an abduction thing that has got to be pretty terrible. But in this scene, trophies. One of the things about trophies is the serial killers do keep them. And here, this is where the dad he follows some kids into the cornfield. He thinks that this guy. He saw the guy go in the cornfield. He follows the kids. He thinks they're in threat. There he is. There's our bad guy, and he goes in with the bat. And the kids confuse him with being the threat, and they end up beating him up. But I think I wrote trophies in this because I think it's important to talk about these serial killers who keep trophies. And in this case, it's very evident that it was the charm from the bracelet. You don't really learn that in the movie is the lovely Bones, that he actually keeps her body later on. He keeps her body in that safe. And that's what that safe meant. I didn't quite understand that towards the end. And you see him throw the sack, her body into the safe and shut it and lock it. Right. And that's his big trophy. And that was what helped him survive all this time. You see the mom going to the police station to ask for answers. And but trophies are a big part of this. And for a serial killer. So, Danny, you got any comments on that?
And my wife and I were watching this. As soon as they showed that picture of him sitting in the chair in front of the safe, we both looked at each other and says, "That's where the body is."
Yeah.
And so we figured it out a little bit quicker.
Yeah, but, what I thought he had in there? I thought he had a bunch of different trophies from all the victims in there. I didn't think it was the bones himself. I should have thought about the title and go, "Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah."
And but we talked about trophies a little earlier, and it is very true that when the sister, who I would not want to mess with because she was in shape, doing push-ups and running and doing all this stuff. She probably could have beat that old guy. But
yeah.
When she opened up that notebook and started going through there and saw the lockets of hair and saw those are typical trophies and of what people do. You get these burglars that will save their trophies are women's underwear. And it's weird, but that happens. And I had a serial robber that he wore what we called his robbery clothes. And each time he did a robbery, he'd wear the exact same clothes. So when he got arrested, I'm interviewing him. And he goes, "That wasn't me, sir." And I show him the clothes. "Well, these are the clothes you were wearing when you were arrested in." And I showed him another picture of the clothes he was wearing when he was doing another lick. And he still goes, "That wasn't me, sir." And I go, "Okay, whatever." But those are just things that bad guys do. They do the same thing over and over. That's why we catch them, and they keep things that they take. And
yeah, a certain amount of the crime itself, whether it's a burglar, a hot prowl burglar, that's another one. I guess we ought to explain a hot prowl burglar. So a hot prowl burglar is somebody who breaks in when they know somebody's in the house.
Yep.
That's typically at night, and they enjoy the fact that they're able to do it when somebody's in the house. They get the excitement. There's almost a sexual release to do that. And when these criminals do this stuff, it's for them it's a badge of honor. They're able to do these things. And whereas regular burglary, most burglars wait for everybody to go to work and then they hit your house during the daytime. But a hot prowl burglar wants the excitement and hits your house while you're there, and he wants you to know that he hit your house while you were there.
And that's goes back to Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. That's where he probably started out as just a hot prowl burglar, and escalated into, after he did his first murder. That's even the greater deal. And it goes, now I have to kill people to get off on whatever sexual feeling or mental feeling he's doing.
Right.
And, so that kind of morphed into that, and it's definitely the same thing in the child abuse community and child murders and stuff. These guys, once they hit that golden, whatever you want to call it, they can't go backwards. They have to keep murdering and keep moving forward.
Murdering. I read this. My dad went to the FBI National Academy, and he was a middle manager, so he working for Detroit, and he went, and so he gets these things, these bulletins, the FBI bulletins, and I used to read them before I moved to California, and he still gets them, but I remember reading this article about peeping Toms and how many serial rapists start as peepers, right? They look, but the excitement of peeping isn't quite enough, and they progress to being rapists, right? They have to break in and rape the object of their obsession, right? So there is this progression, as you've talked about, breaking and stealing underwear to progressing to more physical contact with victims too. So the hot prowl burglar, that's why they're really dangerous. And we always assume if you have a hot prowl burglar, we have to really work on them, because something's going to happen. Some guy's going to wake up in the middle of the night, this guy in his house, and there's violence going to happen, or somebody's going to be targeted, or they develop like Richard Ramirez and become a serial killer or a serial rapist. So they are dangerous things, and you need to take these clues and deal with these guys, right? In this case, though, they are getting, they've kind of narrowed out all the one thing about the dad's obsession, right? Is dad, everybody looks like a suspect to the dad. And the police officer gradually works his way through all of them and clears all of them. And then he lands on the neighbor, right? His daughter happened to take a picture of the neighbor. And then he thought, why didn't I think of the neighbor? He's right there, right across the street. And of course, we get the spiritual, his daughter cluing him in, from heaven, Susie, that this is probably the guy, right? And she's in this other world, and she realizes that his next target is his sister. So now she's really motivated for a couple of reasons to stick around and not go follow Holly into the hinterland there, I guess. And he starts focusing on him, and he starts following him. But there isn't really much he can do. He got beat up. He's getting threatened with arrest. And he's moving. He's trying to move past this, as is the mom. She's trying to move past this, even though the threat is still there. They just don't see it, but he does begin to see it and begins to monitor this guy and follow this guy. But the police are kind of convinced him, you need to let this go and let us do our job. And that's what in some ways I agree with that, but I do like the fact that people pay attention to what's going on in their neighborhood and give us tips, right? I mean, that's how you actually solve crimes. It's
yeah.
Right. And this guy is an obvious subject. I mean, he's building child furniture in his house. He has no children, right? I mean, that one would have clued me in right away. Hey, we got to look at this guy. Let's check in his background. And the other thing I wanted to talk about about serial killers, because he goes through a whole list of serial killers. We can roll that. So I don't know, we rolled the trophy scene, right? But
Yes.
They talk about he first killed his landlady, then he killed let's see, Jackie Myers in Delaware, Lisa Fox, some 6-year-old named Johnson, then Flora Hernandez. He goes through this whole. Go ahead.
I think in total were 7 victims.
Yes,
including Susie. And the first one, yes, was his landlady. Is the only grown up that he killed.
Right.
And then he tried to stay between the range of 13, 15. However, he got one of 6 6 year old, a 6 year old,
Yeah.
and even another of 5 years old.
Yeah. I think I got six. I think six was youngest, is what they said. And yeah, as the landlady was the first one, I imagine kids were easier to control and capture. And I suspect he has. But here's the thing that I really wanted to talk about this, and most people don't know about. You know, the federal government, the FBI, and police agencies around the country have gotten hit the fact that serial killers travel. So here, he's in. I forget what state they're in. They're in. They're not in New Jersey, are they? But he started in Delaware, is where this guy started killing, right? Maybe he was in
Mm.
Pennsylvania, they were at. But he moved multiple states, which makes it hard for cops, because you remember what's going on in the community around you. Maybe you see teletypes and you pay attention to those teletypes. That's the old style, right? The teletype comes through, and we had a process where when I first started, that the teletypes for the day were passed around, and you read the teletypes and initial. Do you remember doing this, Danny? You
Yes,
had the
sir.
initial all the teletypes, so that you made sure you read the crimes that came out on the teletype, so they were in your head. And if you saw something, you could do something. Same with wanted posters. So there was a way, we had a mechanism for doing that. But you tended to pay more attention to the ones that are more local. You're not reading stuff from Delaware or other states. And now we have this thing called VIACAP. I forget exactly what that stands for, but what it is they put the MO of these murders, people that the victims of serial killers murders, into this national database that is headed by the FBI, and they look for the different modus operandi, the ways that these serial killers kill, and then they link them up. And is the guy an organized serial killer? Is he a disorganized serial killer? And they look for these similarities, and that's one of the ways that we solve crimes today, is because we have serial killer truck drivers who kill all across the country. We certainly had guys like Ted Bundy that kill all across the country, and those are really hard to link up because of the different jurisdictions. So we have databases like VIACAP to do that. So from 1960s and 70s till now, we've kind of grown up and we've expanded technology. Certainly DNA databases are part of that as well. Danny, you want to address that at all? Or?
Yeah, there's some huge advances that's been made. Just excuse me for a second. Huge advances just in our careers. In the last 10 years of our careers, huge advances. Going back to 1972, okay, looking at the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, we still had Station B, which was our dispatch center out of the Hall of Justice, up into the mid 70s. I think 77 is when the radio center opened up. So back then, you'd run somebody. So one of the dispatchers would have to go through a file and look up a name and what you would run. Back in those days, when you had a crime and you had fingerprints, an actual fingerprint detective would go through fingerprints. They'd have them filed in different loops and valleys and different things. And they had to do that by hand. These days, you stick a fingerprint in a computer and boom, in about 5 minutes, you know who it is. And so that's the great thing about technology. Back then, communication, even communication between departments, on a department the size of LAPD and the Sheriff's Department, communication between stations was unheard of. When I came on, we had 8 radio frequencies for I think about 18, 19 stations at the time, and put up in 3 different geographical zones. And whenever we put out a broadcast, it would be right to our station and maybe to like another neighboring station. If we had independent cities in between that we wanted them to hear, the term was called C code, and it was where our dispatchers would tie in with their dispatchers, and it was just a big pain in the hips. Nowadays, you get on the radio and you say, I got to have a broadcast. I want it to go countywide. It'll go countywide. I want this broadcast to go to Monterey County because I think our suspect's going up to Salinas. You can do that. And they didn't have that back then. And the tracking, it was unreal to what we have now. It's because there wasn't any tracking. You didn't know who going from city to city, let alone county to county or state to state. And
Go
until
ahead.
you got the FBI involved in it. Because they were real good. FBI and at that time was real good at tracking people in state to state and things like that. And they're still real good at that. The guys that are actually doing the job, they're real good at tracking people state to state. But back then, on the local level, it was unheard of. Didn't do it.
Yeah, and that's I want to do a plug for technology for law enforcement, because all these different technologies we're under attack from the ACLU as everything's an invasion of privacy. In many states, if you get arrested, they can take a DNA sample for you, but other states it's conviction, sometimes misdemeanor, sometimes felonies. But there's this constant assault on these strategies to solve crimes in a lot easier way. There's attacks on automated license plate reader technology. There's attacks on CCTV technology being used. And I just want to remind people, hey, if we're going to limit the authority of law enforcement, because here's the thing, all of those, particularly the CCTV cameras and the automated license, they're in public view. All they do is they take a police officer, instead of a police officer writing down a bunch of plates and then running them, we're automating it. So it's all out in public view, and yet you'll get these civil libertarians who say that, well, these are a threat to privacy. There's ways to deal with people inappropriately using the data that's in there. And the thing about a lot of data, which most people don't understand, you can only keep so much of it because the storage amount of it is fine. But when you get a lot of data, there's this thing called data noise. There's so much of it. You have to find a way to organize it. And when you're really only looking for that data to solve the crime, cops, that's what they're looking for. We're not looking for, the politician who's sleeping around on his wife. We're not, we don't care about that. And you can engineer those things out with rules and stuff like that. But technology is as we have found out, can be very effective at catching somebody like our serial killer in this movie. And so when you hear some of these civil libertarians talking about, we need to get rid of this, it's not fair, we can't trust the cops, think about what we're actually trying to do, because most of these, all of them, are really an effort to try and just to make us more efficient and more effective and catch people before more people are killed. Yet the civil libertarian will never talk about that side of the story when we talk about technology. That's why VIACAP is very important. That's why these DNA databases are very important. That's why we have to have automated fingerprint technology to make it easier to, because criminals are progressing technology wise. We need to be able to do that as well. Let's roll the next scene, evidence, because there's a couple of things we need to talk about in terms of this one. So the sister, who is now the target of the serial killer, she actually breaks into this house. And I want to talk a little bit about the legal part of this. As a cop, I can't illegally enter somebody's house and get the evidence and then be able to use them in court, right? It would be suppressed as an illegal search. But a citizen who does it, who's not doing it as an agent for the police, it's actually legal. So this girl, she's looking at this guy and she knows, because he's creepy and he's watching her now, she knows this is the guy who killed his sister, and she decides to break in, and she does break in. And this is really a good part of the movie because it's kind of harrowing, and she's scared, and this guy's creepy guy, and she actually breaks in. And it's funny because I had basements when I grew up, so that's that window. You break in that window and you go upstairs, right? And she finds it. I don't know how she finds it so quickly, but she manages to find it. She reads the diary, she gets the evidence, and of course he hears her, and then he's going after her. But that evidence is all legitimate, right? She sees the plan he goes in, designing the space that he's going to capture Susie in. And I think it was the lock of her hair that really put this over the top, Rob.
And her name written in all the plans.
Yes.
He even had a map from the location of the house and the
direct route to get there.
Yes, and alternate route. The guy has done his homework, but he left it all in hard copy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's part of the foreplay, right? That's the pornography for a serial killer. Go ahead, Danny.
Yeah. What they call that is burglary. She broke into a house and stole something. That's burglary.
Yeah.
Probably nothing would happen to her because the victim, he split. So you have a victimless crime, basically. How she found it is it was weird because she stepped on that rug, and heard a creak. And in old houses like that, you don't. Those are really good, solid hardwood floors. You don't hear creaks. And she goes, "This isn't right." The only part that got me was why she landed on her back when she jumped out the window. I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, we used to jump out of second floor windows all the time. It was like cheap entertainment for us. That's some of the stupid things we do. My brothers, we'd jump from house to house, on the roofs and stuff. But how she ended up on her back, that hurt. She recovered from it, got up, and made a hurdle out of that picket fence, which was cool. Like I said earlier, I wouldn't want to mess with her because
she's in shape. She's the jock, right? And but you know what? It is good that the family does finally solve the crime, because it's really not the cops; it's the family that solves the crime.
Right.
And it's weird because she goes home with this when her mom comes home, and she doesn't say anything right away, but she says something to the drunken grandma, and they call the police. And of course, the guy knows the jig is up. He takes off as soon as she's able to escape and get away, because he's going to go set up somewhere else. This isn't over with for him in his mind. He's going to just go set up somewhere else. And you can see the tension between the mom and the grandma. I will say Susan Sarandon plays a pretty good drunken.
She's played it in several movies.
So she's got that one. Maybe she needs to probably read some history and before she opens her mouth about politics. But she does play a pretty good drunk. Maybe she's just skilled in that area, right? So, but I think so. The evidence is admissible because the cops didn't break in and take it, right? And how they got it was not by their control, even though but she's a kid, right? So we're not going to.
In fact, it is. They got it legitimately. They are retrieving stolen property.
Yes, and they gotta look at it. So it's good. Here's Mark Wahlberg coming down, and to see his wife, and eventually the girl gives up the goods, and so it was good that the family there is. Because part of this is about the family recovering, right, and the powerlessness of it. And I keep talking about the victim was empowered because she's able to stay in this other world and impact what happens. She's able to, as we see, she's able to get her kiss with her boyfriend, through Ruth. She enters Ruth's body, and that's the whole ghost element to this thing, the movie The Ghost.
Right.
But she got her kiss, and everybody feels good about that. As Reese Ritchie is the name of the actor. I had not seen him in anything else before, but he pined away for her, and he was letting go, and then he manages to get this kiss with her, and he realizes it's her. But I was happy that the family was the one who solved the problem, because it is empowerment for the victim to move forward, and being able to help solve the problem or solve the crime is part of that power.
Now, the only problem I had was, as she's getting her kiss, I was my wife and I both, we were kind of hoping that some way she would supernaturally, telepathically send a message to him that, hey, the body's in the safe that they're getting.
Yes.
It's not the safe. Then I hope the door break open as it's going into the sinkhole.
My wife and I were when she says to him, "Kiss me," and I thought she was going to tell her, "I'm in the box."
I'm in the box. Get me out of here. Well, okay, so you guys both watched it I watched it with my wife as well. What'd your wife think, Danny?
Brought back some memories for her, as when you're a kid. Her father always told her the same thing our parents told us: don't go to strangers, don't do this, don't do that. And there was this one area near her house in the San Fernando Valley after they immigrated to the United States. Her dad goes, always never walk on that side of the sidewalk because there's some heavy bushes there and everything like that.
Yeah.
And always, if you get to that, if you have to walk by there, go across the street to the other side. And one day she didn't. And while a guy came out and attempted to abduct her, she ran across the street to where she was going. And I think it was a 7-Eleven or something like that. And or a mom and pop store. They were able to call LAPD. LAPD came out and took the bad guy to jail.
Cornfield, wooded area along the bushes on the street, right?
Yeah. And so she thought about that. And then I probably told you in the past, she was a reserve police officer for San Fernando Police Department. And she was involved because she reads and writes and speaks Spanish. Obviously, she's from Mexico, or raised in Mexico. She did a lot of translations within the community in San Fernando and with LAPD and Foothill Division. And a lot of the investigation, or some of the investigations, had to do with child murders and child abductions and stuff like that. So she liked it. She thought it was, just like I said, brought back memories to her. And she goes, well, they should do this and that. And I go, yeah, but remember, this is 72. It's not 1990 or something like that.
Yeah.
But she'd go, still said you should do this.
Well, let's roll the last scene. Everyone dies. And Martine, what did your wife think as you rolled the scene?
We were both a little disappointed that the guy got away. Yeah, he died, but that is not punishment.
Yeah. Well, he died as he was trying to entice somebody else to get in his car, and it's implied that with the icicle and the afterworld, that
Yes,
ultimately it was Susie got justice on him, or the girls, all the victims got justice on him by making sure he killed. Now, this scene where he falls down this whole cliff, I could think of, well, Susie went down this big cliff into the sinkhole, right? This big pit in the sinkhole, and so it's, to me, that the scene was tied together with her in the safe going down into the pit. I don't know if you guys felt that when you watched the movie. I kind of felt that
in a way, yeah, but more graphic. And the graphic on that falling down that cliff, that was pretty nasty.
Yeah,
the way they showed each twist and tweak of the body, and all broken up and everything at the very end, that was pretty graphic.
Yeah, broken bones instead of the lovely bones. Yeah. He's got the broken bones, and you saw the safe tumbling too, and she's in it, and then it sinks into the hole, and then you see him go down. So I think, it was justice from the other world. I will say, after something like this, he was going to be one of those guys that's going to be on the FBI's most wanted list, which they started back in the gangster days, as Bonnie and Clyde days. So that did exist. So he wasn't going to go unidentified. They were going to keep looking for him. It's just we didn't have the tools back in the day to find somebody like him as quickly as we do today. And even today, people were looking for, look at what happened to Whitey Bulger. If they got a plan and they're organized, they know how to stay low key for decades, which he probably would have. So, in some ways, I understand he didn't get justice, Martine, but at the very least, there was some kind of implication of justice from the other world, and the victims got to take him out. I don't know if you...
Yeah, but not the family.
Yeah, well, Susie, I guess. I don't know if you believe the whole icicle thing, where it drops and then he loses his footing and he falls down the cliff. Maybe there is a little bit of justice there. We never know. There's so many disappearances that happen that we really never know what happened to people. There's probably a lot more serial killers out there, or the ones that are active have a lot more victims than we'll ever know about. And for some of them, they'll never be justice, which just brings me back to, why would we let people like, Richard Allen Davis out after he kills somebody like Polly Klaas? These are predators. These are killers. He's not going to change. Why do we have this hope eternal that guys like that are going to change? They need to stay in prison for a long time.
You talk about the justice. In a way, the family did get justice because they found out who the suspect really is.
Yeah.
What they didn't get was closure. And a lot of people don't get this closure thing. You need closure. You need somehow to figure out a way to close the book. And usually that is through some type of memorial service, funeral, burial, by getting the body back and everything. That's what hurt so bad when that safe sunk into the sinkhole, because they'll never get that closure they wanted. And that's, to me, that's more important than justice. Justice is going to get there, whether he falls down a cliff and dies, or if he gets hooked up and spends the rest of his life in prison. It doesn't. It's going to happen some way, somehow.
And they already know it's him. His taking of the safe and putting it down the sinkhole is one last element of control,
right,
in this thing, which is a big deal for serial killers. Martine, I'll let you have the last word, and then we'll wrap it up.
Me? Oh no, that shows poor judgment. Don't
shows
do that.
You're an honest man, Martine.
Well, thank you so much for pinch hitting there, Martine, and jumping in on the show. And Danny, thank you for joining me for the show. It was a little different crime drama, but we got a chance to talk about victims, which I think we probably need to do a little bit more of these days, so people understand what the losses are all about for these folks.
Right.
All right, Martine, I think we are done for the day, and catch us every Tuesday at 8 a.m. Pacific Standard Time for Morning Coffee with the Chief on YouTube and Rumble. Thank you so much.
See you.
See you.